from the conversation with Swaruu of ERRA.
When you pass through the Van Allen bands through the astral, does the DNA in your body somehow activate or not? Because it is within the toroids of the Van Allen bands.
But if you pass the Van Allen bands in the astral, you don't have DNA per se. As you raise your frequency from 3D to 5D, your consciousness perception goes up, and you have access to more information that was always there. Just as you begin to see a being that before was invisible to you, and then a vapor, and then hard matter. In that same way, your DNA will activate or manifest. But it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It was always there, but you can't access it without the right frequency. Objects, creatures, DNA, all have components that are partly in other existential frequencies, which we can only perceive with high enough frequency. Originally in Spanish, February 2023. Questions from the public. Yazhi, if you don't remember something, does your DNA also reflect the not remembering? Or does it also hold unconscious memories? Actually, I think you already answered that. The part that you don't remember is also the part of the DNA that is not activated, what on Earth they call junk DNA. That is, the information is there, but you don't have access to it. That's why it seems to be inactive. Okay, well, it goes with one of the questions from the audience. It's this one. What is in the junk DNA exactly? How to awaken dormant DNA and of our past lives? Imagination, affirmations, meditation, etc. It is everything you were in your most relevant, immediate past lives. It does awaken depending on your level of consciousness and awareness. But usually it activates when you disincarnate. I mean, you have access to those memories when you disincarnate, but the physical DNA is not activated, obviously, because the person has already died. So, in life, it cannot be activated, can it? Do meditations, visualizations, etc. help? Of course they do. Everything that expands the consciousness helps a lot. That is the way. It gets activated by following the path to enlightenment. However, not everything is ever activated. Not everything. The complexity of the DNA, the number of chromosomes and strands, reflects the complexity of the soul of the person. And the soul, or katra itself, is formed by the past experiences in the person's timeline. Not timeline external to the person, I mean the one that he experiences even when changing bodies, incarnation after incarnation. And in your DNA, everything is activated? Even in us, not all of it. But there is more, and that is reflected in the 24 chromosomes, 24 strands. Because our Svarunian DNA indicates a very complex katra. And that reflects that we can access more past life information than other people. But it is a reflection of consciousnesses, not races. So I insist, no one is at the mercy of their DNA. That's just a reflection of who you are. Change who you are, and your DNA will reflect that change. No one is limited. I remember many past lives and what I learned in them. That's why I carry 24 chromosomes, 24 strands. But all Lyrians are like that, being that they only don't remember because of their own experience agreements, prenatal agreements. But they are all just as expanded. The only difference with me is that I remember.
Would the DNA activation be like the falling of the veil of forgetfulness? That's why you can't activate everything in this life?
DNA reflects and activates as you remove the veil of forgetfulness. Whether you remember does not depend on your DNA. It depends on what you have designed for yourself in the afterlife, where you design your next incarnation. DNA is the first step of materializing a soul. That is to say that for biological beings, DNA is like particles are for inanimate objects, like a chair, in which first manifests the particle of the etheric field of potential energy, and then the particle associates with others to form a more complex structure. The same thing happens with DNA. It is a crystallization or manifestation of a soul that becomes something material in crystalline form, containing information in the form of vibration and its frequencies, to then form cells that in turn will form a larger and more complex body. But the unit of manifestation of a soul on the material side is the cell, not the whole body. Clarifying that there is no material side and etheric side. Everything is etheric, but there is the experience of the physical. So DNA is a materialization of each person's katra. It is who you are.
Thank you very much, Yazhi. Next question from the audience. What parts of the DNA are activated first and then successively in correlation to a person expanding in consciousness? And what mental abilities can be developed besides telepathy? That is, if there is an order.
It depends on each person, but it depends on what the person is thinking. It depends on what the person achieves at the level of spiritual development and consciousness. There are no limits. The DNA will only reflect what the person is. So if someone develops an ability, telepathy for example, it is not that their DNA is activated, but that part of their DNA is activated because they developed telepathy. The DNA is just a reflection, a symptom of whatever the soul is doing. It is not the cause. Then there is no point in upgrades done externally, only in individual cases, in abductions.
Upgrades by gardeners, you mean?
Yes. They serve to force the appearance of such katra memories. But they were already there. The problem is that as soon as the artificial alteration begins, the frequency of the modified body is being modified. And with that, it no longer links the katra as before, or not as well. So if a body has suffered damage at the genetic level, as happens on Earth all the time, the gardeners can artificially return the damaged DNA configuration to better connect with the original katra. Okay, I understand. Thank you. I have this question from someone related that popped out now. It's quick. If the DNA is just a reflection, a symptom of whatever the soul is doing, it is not the cause, then it would be wrong to say repair the DNA, etc., no? Because it is not really damaged. It just reflects what you are. Well, it depends on how you look at it. And this is more complicated because, on the one hand, the DNA alteration from eating GMO junk could be in the person's life plan, but on the other hand, it is an invasive alteration. From the perspective of the experience in the physical, yes, you can damage the DNA, like you damage a hand or an eye. But in essence, the soul or katra cannot be damaged, only the body. But the body, by losing connection with the soul, does deteriorate more and more. All right, okay, so related question. Listening to audio frequencies that say repair DNA with 5 to 8 Hz or 432 Hz, does it work? No, sorry. But it does help you feel a lot better. And if it helps you with your mood and all that, you are reorganizing your cells. I mean, it doesn't help directly, unless they are very specific frequencies that alter the DNA to the desired repaired status with MedPod technology. But that's MedPods, not YouTube and a pair of Chinese headphones with shitty sound.
I have a similar question. If supposedly the 52 Hz solfeggio frequencies repairs DNA, does it do so based on the DNA that we have inactive in 3D or the one that is active? I think it was answered already.
Yes, it was said that it doesn't repair anything. Not in the way people expected, no. However, there is an element of placebo effect. There is also an element of improving body mood, lowering cortisol, lowering heart rate. All of that does work. And with the same bad audio phones.
Then let's move on to another question which is similar. Regarding the DNA, what are the chances it will start to activate in a person who is receiving ET information? And do psychedelics help expand consciousness DNA?
Answering the first part, it is of no use if the person is stuck in his own frequencies that are different from the ET information. That is, within the agreements of the matrix. But if the person is receptive, with a similar frequency to the incoming information, it resonates with them, then the ET communication does greatly accelerate the activation of their consciousness, spiritual level, and it will be reflected in their DNA. And if the psychedelics help to expand their consciousness, DNA, although I should not say this, and although they damage the body and give the individual an experience for which he is not prepared as a life experience, it does help to develop other capacities of perception that also, in turn, will be reflected in the DNA as an activation. However, I do not recommend the use of psychedelics because they strongly damage the physical body. It is not prepared for that level of psychic energy. It melts like when you run an electric current voltage through the thin wires that were not designed for that. The same thing happens with your nervous system. The first thing that will happen is that the neurons of the central nervous system will run out of neurotransmitters, and this causes them to go into a blackout state with no energy, and it will take time for them to re-establish their discharge potential between neuronal dendrites. And in the worst case, psychedelics can cause neuronal death.
I think you said that the activation of the DNA is noticeable in the healing of wounds, right? Well, they heal super fast for me.
Having more complex DNA is also reflected there. but it is also due to a high metabolism and a healthy state. That's what some crop circles are supposed to be for too, aren't they? They carry something that is supposed to resonate with you, and that activates some DNA, although you don't consciously know what it is. It is supposed to activate memories, yes. Many people enter an incarnation with an activator or switch that is like the one they use for the MK Ultra, that when an image or sound appears, it activates and they change their behavior. Although I do not have very firm data on this topic of the crop circles activating the DNA, I do see it as congruent because of the prenatal agreements. It is said a lot up here that the circles activate the DNA. Okay, Yazhi, next question. You say that the DNA is crystalline. What does that refer to? What exactly is crystalline? Does it have to do with the form of ordered organization of molecules? I think you mentioned something like that in the subject of reactors. Human DNA is not so much crystalline, although it is also. It is less crystalline, although I don't like the word less. Looking for example, a crystalline structure refers to the way in which its molecules are structured. A window glass is very crystalline, while a wall is not crystalline, it is opaque. The fact that the structure of the molecules is arranged in an ultra-ordered way causes light to move between them, giving it the quality of being transparent. In the case of quartz and optical memories, such as those used in Taygeta's holographic computers, as well as DNA, it means that light can reach the entire inner structure, not just the surface, as with something with an opaque structure. Light is vibration and is composed of many wavelengths, which are in themselves harmonics, that cause one point or another of a structure to vibrate or react to its stimulus when it reaches it, depending on the very qualities of each molecule within the crystalline structure. This means that both in the case of the crystalline artificial memory of a holographic computer and in the case of DNA, the light reaches all its components, activating or deactivating them. To be activated is to emit a vibration, or to respond by emitting one's own light. Living beings emit radiation in the form of gravity because they have consciousness. Human science itself says that they emit light. For me, it is a matter of wavelengths. Let's say they do emit radiation in many frequencies. So, the subtle frequencies, which in themselves are all gravity gradients and which come from the source or the potential energy field, act on the DNA by activating or deactivating it. In the case of DNA, the more complex it is, the more crystalline it becomes. That is to say that its structure is visibly more ordered in its molecules towards the perfectly ordered crystalline. The higher the complexity and the higher the frequency, the greater the molecular order tends to be. So by light, referring to DNA, you mean vibration, wavelength, yes? Why is it called light? And another clarifying question, what does it mean to activate or deactivate the DNA? Your question is important because it was what I was about to write next. Human science says that humans emit light. Light refers to the fact that they emit electromagnetic radiation in the range of what Earth science categorizes as light. That is, living things emit radiation between ultraviolet and infrared on the other side of the spectrum.
It would be the aura?
Yes, it is reflected in the aura, yes. And depending on the vibrational frequency of each person, it is the wavelength of the light that each person emits. By DNA activation is meant that the vibration of the stimulus is congruent with the frequency of each part of the DNA. As I explained earlier, each part of the DNA strand is an antenna that vibrates or lights up with the corresponding incoming stimulus from the spiritual side. The DNA, when activated, is understood as the point of the complete chain, removing a kind of inert shaft that protects it. And when it is removed, it is understood that this gene has been activated. And this will produce the corresponding change in the cells that contain it, forcing them to change their morphology to what is dictated by the DNA. Seen from another angle, the etheric side of the spirit emits a complex signal that activates and deactivates the DNA as if playing the keys of a piano. Being that although all the notes are there, only some of them are activated with vibration. And together we obtain a result, the complete piece of music that is the individual, and all that characterizes him, and all that makes him unique. Oh, a comment. The shaft that covers the non-activated DNA parts is very similar to the myelin that covers the axon of the neurons. Monosodium glutamate, present in countless processed foods, attacks and deteriorates this myelin shaft, both in the neurons and in the DNA of each cell. This causes the individual to receive a chaotic and contradictory signal from the etheric field, with parts that are semi-activated and parts that are not. In other words, it is like operating an electronic device with the insulating sleeves of its internal wires all damaged and full of short circuits.
And that cover is known to scientists on Earth?
Yes, and I know because Bruce Lipton mentioned it, but not in the context I just gave. He just explained what gene activation means on a medical level. What I'm giving goes beyond that. What is known is that it attacks the myelin of neuronal dendrites. But it attacks DNA as well, since myelin is also there, or at least the protective coat of each gene is made of the same material. Monosodium glutamate attacking myelin causes that neurons simply cannot depolarize correctly. That is, they cannot give their chemical electrical signal efficiently to cause, in turn, the depolarization of the next neuron. That is, it inhibits nerve and neuronal transmission, which is the same thing. It also causes depolarization leakage in the wrong directions. These are literally short neuronal circuits caused by impaired myelin, and they are the cause of a number of neurological and nerve problems.
Alzheimer's, among others.
Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, epilepsy, dementia, memory loss, all of these. Although, of course, there are other factors at work there. But neuronal demyelination is a component present in all of them to one extent or another. And I don't know how much human medical science knows, and it's very likely that it doesn't, not in this way.
Another question. So it is little of our biological parents' DNA that makes up our DNA. Most of it we already bring with us with our memories?
This question is the same as the one I have, or similar. I leave it to complement. If I have a baby, will it inherit my DNA and my wife's DNA? Is the DNA in our bodies from the construction of our own souls? Or is it 12 chromosomes from our mom, 12 from our dad, as we are taught? If so, how does it relate to the fact that DNA is defined by our own consciousness? If DNA is a material representation of our soul, how do we explain some physical attributes that are passed down from parent to child? Does it mean that the child incarnated in that family because their soul has similar attributes to their parents? Because you are not seeing something obvious here, and it is a problem of human perception. They share the same DNA because from the etheric side, they are the same person. And I am talking about the entire human and Lyrian species and beyond. But I'm just complicating this conversation. Where the closer a group of people is to the one we are observing as a base, the more their DNA will be similar. That is to say that the DNA of their parents is their DNA. It's all intertwined from the spirit side. And although many hate it, all of humanity and more are literally the same person, being that each individual is just a reflection or a variant of a larger, more complex being. As I have explained before, the closer to source someone is in density, the more complex they are. And this is reflected in their DNA, making it more and more complicated and more crystalline at the same time. Yes, but it was said that many times we have nothing to do with our family or parents, especially the starseeds. I don't understand that. How are we the same person? The metaphysical aside. If that were so, we would all have the same DNA, us from our parents, them from theirs, being the same person, and so on, ad infinitum. Yes, I have said it. But that is at another level, between variants. That is, observing the differences at a minute level, not at a more expanded level. It's like saying that your index finger is not the same as your thumb. They are not from one point of view, but they are both, first, part of the same hand, and then of the same body. So yes, at that minute specific level, let's say in a walk-in's case, in some cases the genetics of the parents no longer matter, and they could be as different as any other stranger in another country. The genetics here differ greatly, but it doesn't matter because they are artificially linked or by the intervention of the grace, which would also be artificially. I understand that part, yes, but my parents have not lived what I lived in this or in other lives, so as DNA is the record of what we are, their DNA cannot be the same as mine. Because in another more expanded level, you have lived what your parents lived, but by sequence of events, you are ahead of them. That is to say, you have their experience that you inherited in their DNA, but they do not have your experience that you have generated for yourself in your own DNA. It's complicated to understand this for me a little bit. Let's see. I will explain it from another angle. Now, from the whole to the particular people. You, as Gosha, are the source, and the cells of your body are the people or your fragments, and all the cells of your body contain the same DNA. Even if they are different, the cells of your pancreas, Sirians, contain the same DNA as the cells of your liver, Andromedates. However, they also contain points or details within the same DNA that make them form a pancreas or liver cell. They contain the same but activated differently. The same with races and the same with relatives.
Thank you, Yazhi. Yes, it is understood. Still, their life path was different from mine, so their DNA should be different, although I know we are talking about levels of differences.
It is different, but that's in detail, as the life of one cell differs from the other, being that they come from the same being. Different levels, yes, but everything works the same. There is only one being, which is the source. Everything else are holographic fragments of that source, and that is reflected in the DNA. That is why it is so similar. And the closer people are, for example relatives, father, mother, child, the more they will share similar things. Like 3 liver cells that are together forming tissues are more similar to each other than a lung cell. Further.
But what about the case when you really have nothing to do with your parents? Like Robert's case, for example. Nothing similar and nothing in common at any level. Only nationality and food tastes.
I look a lot like my father physically. Just that, and also my brother.
It depends on the level, because in any case, even Dr. Senetre is related to Robert's parents, or Rur, the Urma cat.
But if we go to that super expanded level, then we have something in common even with worms. And so everything can be explained this way. Let's talk about the lowest level.
Or anything that is carbon DNA based. The fruit flies.
All carbon-based organisms are closely related and are of the same family as silicon-based organisms, also very common in the cosmos. Okay, lower or more in detail. This is where we have artificial technology to force the experience of a vesicle cell to have the experience of a pancreas cell, vesicle starseed. Its soul or experience is technologically forced to have the Robert experience, even though he had nothing to do with that family. However, he fell into it because it did meet the vibrational frequency requirements that provided Robert with the life incarnation experience he desired.
Technologically, Yazhi?
Yes, in this case, I'm talking about the interventions of the gardeners to match bodies to souls, or the use of total immersion pots.
Was that the case with Robert? Was he intervened by the gardeners?
Surely.
Okay, next question. Robert, your turn.
Okay, DNA can't be created, right? Because that would be determinism.
It can be altered, yes. It is like implanting false memories. But it will not have the connection to the original source of a naturally manifested DNA. So, that artificial alteration, with little or no connection to the source, will be the same as a lower astral entity.
So, from that point of view, it only opens doors to entities, or they become lower entities.
Okay, I have this question. How many chromosomes do animals have? Dogs, horses, monkeys, dolphins? Are chromosomes linked to DNA?
DNA is basically made up of chromosomes. Regarding animals,
when we talk about humans, does it also apply to animals?
what has been explained applies to all living beings. Animals are people, period. It doesn't matter. However, each species will reflect its DNA in a different and particular way, as happens with races in space.
What does it mean to have more than other species?
More complexity doesn't mean more superiority. More refers to what is necessary for the manufacturing of each physical body. The more complex the animal is, especially as far as the nervous system is concerned, the more complexity there will be in its DNA. It is only referring to the expression of genes to manufacture cat or dog.
Too bad you don't see cetaceans.
Whale, cetaceans, 44.
So it takes more to make a chicken for consciousness than to make a human?
It is not reflected only in number.
The human is 23 and some are 24. Why is the pig more complex? Because of nerve endings?
Because quantity does not reflect complexity. It is not as simple as counting chromosomes. The complexity is reflected in the very expression of what is stored in the crystalline material. The information within the crystalline. The chromosomes of the chicken do not contain the same amount of information as that of the cetacean. It is like saying that a set of 48 USB sticks contain more information than a set of 12 USB sticks. First, you have to look at the capacity of each one.
Then why does it have so many chromosomes instead of a few but more powerful ones? Well, we are already going into too much detail, it seems.
I don't have a direct answer. I would say that it is because it somehow accommodated to what was dictated by the frequencies and harmonics that manifested it.
Another day. Lately, we have been talking about parents and how our DNA is similar to theirs. I still have a question there. If I enter as a walk-in into a family, starseed, by immersion or whatever, why is my DNA similar to theirs if I come directly from Taygeta, for example, and they are Lyrians of many lifetimes? Our path is not the same, nor was it. I'm still not clear on that.
That is where the artificial part comes in. Be it the mother's frequencies are tuned to the higher frequencies of a baby before it is born, which happens to be a starseed, through the intervention of the grace, as there are many reported cases of abductions of mothers who will have starseeds. Or the frequencies of the technological walk-in by immersion are adjusted with the machine to those of the person on Earth. In the case of technological walk-ins, the immersion machine works exactly like a voltage converter, so that the frequencies of the non-human person are matched with those of the human body. In this case, there is no need for any concordance in terms of the frequencies of the mother and the father. That is why many starseeds or walkings do not have or did not go through the previous experiences of the family, but they do have access to the memories of those who lent them their bodies.
So my DNA does not necessarily resemble that of my parents. Is that what you mean?
In the case of a starseed that entered from the spiritual side, the source, it has a lot to do. But in the case of immersions, technological walkings, it really has nothing to do with whether or not they have the same frequency, because in the end, the energy converter does the tuning job.
But you could donate some organs to your relatives for DNA compatibility, yes?
Yes, because that is the case, or it is a characteristic of the physical base body.
But if I were to be extracted, would I carry the DNA of my Polish family with me then, to reflect who I am, even if I never went through what my family went through?
The dominant experience of your identity that you have here would change the DNA Gosha, simply because your identity here is of higher energy because of densities, which in turn is a matter of levels of consciousness. While on Earth, the dominant frequency of the place, the very collective unconscious, prevents your Taigeta I from functioning well, because everything else suppresses it. Yes, it is possible, but it requires a lot of consciousness and a lot of energy from the person, and few have achieved it.
So Gosha's DNA would be erased?
No, rather it would be incorporated, because they are also experiences, and they are equally valuable. They become part of your I that you have here. The Polish DNA, or Catalan in Robert's case, is not lost. It becomes part of the enriching experiences of the person in question.
Okay, thank you. I have this question. Is it true that we have two DNAs, one physical and one spiritual?
No, DNA is only an expression in the physical of an energetic pattern on the spiritual side. There will be spiritual DNA only to the degree that there would be energetic body as well. But on the spiritual side, it is more direct manifestation, without having to manifest hard, slow matter.
Next question. How does consciousness attach to DNA? Do real people have different DNA than non-real people? Molecules and atoms are represented in science. How do you know what DNA looks like? Then, since you can't see them.
The field, or the matrix, through the collective consciousness keeps the DNA of non-real people functioning as long as they are closely observed. If they are not observed, they are not even there to see if they have DNA or not. They are part of the landscape. But this could also be argued on a purely philosophical level. They can only see DNA at the biological chemical level, in adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine strands, and not of the vibrational frequency charges they contain and record as cosmic hard drives. Even so, they do find enough logic, but DNA is far from being just that. Although the sequence distribution between adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine can be established or observed as a code, according to the position and sequence of the position of those four in relation to each other.
And one thing, Yazhi. How does the consciousness attach to the DNA?
No, it is not that it adheres. It is the materialization of consciousness. However, that question can also be answered with the part I have already given that explains how the DNA strands and their combinations act as antennas that vibrate in accordance with the soul signal or katra from the spiritual side.
Okay, next question I think has already been answered. What is the relationship between genes and DNA?
Genes are made of DNA.
Okay, so this one. Is it good to send DNA to those companies to get information about yourself, like what things you are predisposed to, or what your genealogy is like? Or is it dangerous, since the deep state is in the possession of your DNA? That said, could the deep state confirm through DNA who is a starseed in this way?
That depends on the individual, whether or not it is really necessary to do that research. The truth is that governments do store DNA. And yes, they are looking for starseeds, especially those of a certain level, to then see how to control or attack them. By certain level, I mean the starseeds that have more awareness and strength of who they are, not to say memory, because they are the ones that break in and disturb the matrix to the greatest degree. They attack the matrix in a very strong way. That's why they attack them so much, and that's the reason why they are targeting children in the last decades, because starseeds are coming in large numbers.
And that comes out in the DNA? Who has memory and who doesn't?
Not necessarily. However, it does show or expose certain characteristics that point to the starseed, because it is already in the Cabal databanks, the sequences that point to one race or another. But there are also markers in the DNA that can demonstrate that it has activated memories that are not of this world. It should be said that there are many people, starseeds, that even being starseeds, are there with full memory, 100% or close to 100%, and that operate in two worlds. And they are the most dangerous, because it is not known if they are walk-ins or were born this way, because it can be any of these cases. And in fact, they are complete extraterrestrials, well camouflaged as ordinary human beings and easy to be confused. And these are very dangerous for the Matrix because they know its tricks and how to overcome them. This also makes it impossible to define what is and what is not extraterrestrial, as I have explained before. It is a foggy and not very accurate area. They may also begin to transmit as starseeds or as lightworkers, as they are called, and they could be labeled as only human fakes, when in fact their consciousness is 100% extraterrestrial, and this includes knowing who they are. And that can be reflected in the government DNA test. So nowadays, I don't recommend doing anything that involves giving DNA to governments. They will only use it for bad things.
Well, as to whether one is a full ET or not, an ET to me is pure step down. That's where I would draw the line. If you didn't go down with a ship, you are a starseed, though no less interesting or relevant.
Okay, but I would argue that in that case, all humans are ETs, and that it's what they are inside that really counts, and not their carcass. However, I know you have your need to clarify them in a more precise way. For example, so that you don't get a trickster claiming to be ET when he's just making it all up. So the parameters are also valid for one thing or another, but not from the point of view of the absolute.
Next question. Could you explain with an example how consciousness encodes an idea that then is reflected in DNA?
The same as in a memory unit. The sequence or harmonics of a consciousness, which is a sequence of vibration, will activate or remain imprinted in the parts of the DNA that by their physical nature match those harmonics. It is recorded as in a USB memory. The nature of what vibrations the DNA responds to changes.
Thank you. Next, is blood type related to DNA?
Although logically everything has to do with the DNA, blood type is just another characteristic that reflects in the manifested on the physical side what the DNA harmonics dictate to it on the other side. It is just another characteristic.
Thank you, Yazhi. I have the following question. Can Yazhi give an overview of how the Taygeta people study DNA? What are they trying to achieve, and what questions are left unanswered? What are the practical applications of this field of study?
Yes, I can, but that's an encyclopedia. A whole day's work of describing, at least.
Yeah, okay. We'll leave it for now. And this one? Tell us about the history behind our DNA strands having been limited to 2.
They were not limited to 2. That is a direct reflection of the dominant or average level of consciousness on planet Earth. But they were not victims. It has been said before, and I will repeat it again. Nobody limited anything in the laboratory. What reflects that as a laboratory changes are only temporary cuts, which do not reflect the whole person. The proof of that is the presence of DNA called junk. It is all there. The changes are made by mind control, and some other times the low level of detail in the DNA of most humans is a reflection of their low level of spiritual evolution. In other words, it reflects that they are young souls, and that is why they are a match to the experience of life on Earth.
Okay, last question. What questions remain unanswered in your DNA science?
In general, I would say they are all answered.
Do you already know everything?
Well, obviously not everything, because DNA is based for the most part in the etheric side, and no one can know that for sure. So there will always be more to study.